Did you understand any of that lecture?
Not a word, but the city's amazing. This place feels alive.
Definitely. Let's find some good coffee.
In the year 1981, Paris was alive with the sounds of music, laughter, and ambition. Students from across the world gathered in the City of Light to pursue knowledge and dreams. Cafes bustled with conversation, bookshops spilled onto sidewalks, and bicycles clattered across cobblestones. But on June 11, 1981, in a cramped student apartment on the western edge of the city, a nightmare unfolded that would forever stain the city's reputation for romance and beauty. A gunshot cracked through the air, sharp, startling, final. Renée Hartevelt, a 25-year-old Dutch student, collapsed instantly, her voice silenced mid-sentence. Just moments before, she had been reading poetry aloud, unaware that the man she trusted, the quiet Japanese student sitting only a few feet away, was raising a rifle behind her. Her killer, Issei Sagawa, stood trembling, the weapon still warm in his hands. Small, frail, and soft-spoken, he didn't look like a murderer. He looked like the kind of man who blended into crowds, invisible, forgettable. But inside him lived a monstrous hunger, a secret obsession that had haunted him since adolescence. And now, with Renée lying lifeless before him, that obsession was about to come alive in the most grotesque way imaginable.
Welcome to the Crime Ledger, where every page reveals a mystery.
Before we dive in, write in the comment section where you are watching from, and if you are a true crime lover, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the bell icon, so you will never miss the next true crime stories.
To Sagawa, she became something else entirely, the embodiment of his deepest, darkest fantasies. Issei Sagawa was born in Kobe, Japan, in 1949. From the outside, his life seemed privileged. His father was a successful businessman, and the family lived comfortably. But Sagawa himself was small, weak, and constantly sick as a child. He grew up feeling physically inferior, bullied, and overlooked. By his teenage years, disturbing desires began to emerge. He later confessed that from the age of 12 or 13, he fantasized about eating human flesh, specifically that of women. His attraction was less about love or companionship and more about possession, about consuming and becoming one with the person he desired. As an adult, he masked these urges behind intellectual pursuits. He studied literature, philosophy, and art. Outwardly, he was a soft-spoken academic. Inwardly, his fantasies only deepened. When he moved to Paris in the late 1970s to pursue a doctorate in comparative literature, he found himself surrounded by tall, confident Western women, the very type he had long fantasized about. To him, they represented everything he was not: strong, beautiful, and unattainable. And then came Renée. From the moment he met her, Sagawa became consumed. She was tall, elegant, intelligent, everything he had dreamed of. He admired her intellect, her voice, her smile. But his admiration wasn't normal. Every visit she made to his apartment, every time she sat across from him reading poetry, his fantasies grew darker. He imagined her flesh in his mouth, imagined the taste of her body, imagined finally fulfilling the hunger that had stalked him for decades. He began planning. Quietly. Carefully. On June 11, 1981, he invited Renée to his apartment once again. He told her he wanted to hear her read German poetry aloud, an innocent intellectual exchange. He offered her dinner and wine, assuring her it would be a pleasant evening. She accepted without hesitation. Why wouldn't she? By all appearances, Sagawa was harmless, a small, awkward man with no trace of menace in his eyes. The table was set when she arrived. Books scattered across the desk. A chair pulled up for her to read comfortably. Hidden just out of her sight, a .22 caliber rifle Sagawa had purchased for this moment. Renée sat down, opening a book of poetry, her voice filling the apartment with the rhythm of German verse. Sagawa sat behind her, silent, his heart pounding. He knew this was the moment. He raised the rifle, aimed at her neck, and pulled the trigger. Renée's body fell limp. The book slipped from her hands. The room fell into an unnatural silence. For a brief moment, Sagawa stood frozen, staring at what he had done. Then, slowly, a smile crept across his face. He later admitted that he felt no remorse, no panic, only relief. He had finally crossed the line from fantasy into reality. But the killing was not his ultimate goal. For Sagawa, this was only the beginning. He undressed her carefully, trembling not from fear but from excitement. He touched her body as though she were both sacred and profane, his goddess and his prey. Tears filled his eyes, not of grief, but of overwhelming desire. And then he took a kitchen knife. The sound of steel sliding against flesh filled the room. He cut into her, photographing every stage, documenting his act as if preserving the memory for eternity. Later, he would describe the taste of her flesh with chilling calm. It was tender, like raw tuna. For 2 days, he lived inside his fantasy. He cooked parts of her flesh, seasoned them lightly, and ate them. Other parts he consumed raw. He stored pieces in his refrigerator, carefully wrapped like leftovers from a butcher. He took photographs, wrote notes, relived the act again and again. While Paris outside bustled with life, laughter, and beauty, inside one small apartment a woman's body was being desecrated by a man whose hunger could never be satisfied. But fantasy and reality soon collided. Renée's body could not remain hidden forever. The smell began to seep through the apartment, creeping into the hallways. Sagawa knew time was running out. So he began the grisly task of cutting what remained of her into smaller pieces, wrapping them in plastic bags, and packing them into 2 large suitcases. On June 13, 1981, he called a taxi. When the driver arrived, Sagawa struggled to drag the heavy luggage down the stairs. The driver even asked what was inside. Sagawa laughed nervously and replied, "Books." The driver didn't press further. Sagawa directed him to the Bois de Boulogne, a sprawling park on the western edge of Paris known for its secluded paths and hidden corners. There, under the summer sun, he dragged the suitcases toward a quiet pond. Witnesses saw him, this frail man, barely able to manage the weight, sweating, struggling. Some thought it odd. Others looked away. Finally, he left the suitcases in the bushes, convinced he had escaped. But he hadn't. Hours later, joggers passing by noticed the abandoned luggage. Curious, they approached. The smell hit them first. Then, with shaking hands, they opened one of the cases. What they saw sent them screaming. Inside were human remains, cut, wrapped, stuffed like garbage. The police were called immediately. Investigators swarmed the scene, horrified at what they found. This wasn't a typical murder. This was something darker, more deliberate. But at that moment, they didn't yet know whose body it was. Or who could have done something so monstrous. The suitcases had revealed the horror. But the question remained, who was the killer? And how long could he hide before Paris learned his name? Police opened the 2 abandoned suitcases found at the Bois de Boulogne. The scene inside was beyond comprehend. Bloodied, dismembered human remains, legs, arms, chunks of flesh, wrapped crudely in plastic. Detectives recoiled, some gagging as the putrid stench hit them. Even seasoned officers who had seen countless corpses were left shaken. This wasn't a robbery gone wrong. It wasn't a jealous lover's outburst. This was something colder, calculated, almost ritualistic. Immediately, the question spread through the department and the press alike: who was she? And who could do something like this? The answer came sooner than anyone expected. That same week, the Dutch embassy received word that one of their students, Renée Hartevelt, had not been seen in days. Friends and professors at the Sorbonne grew alarmed. Renée was diligent, punctual, and never missed her classes or appointments. Her description, a tall, 25-year-old Dutch woman with blonde hair, matched what police could identify from the remains. Still, detectives needed more. They combed the Bois de Boulogne for additional clues, scraps of fabric, personal belongings, traces of fingerprints. But what they found next would blow the case wide open. Inside one of the suitcases, tucked carelessly between the plastic wrappings, investigators found papers and receipts, documents that pointed to a small Japanese student living nearby. The name was clear, Issei Sagawa. Detectives wasted no time. Within hours, they tracked Sagawa's address. When officers knocked on his apartment door, he opened it quietly, his eyes calm behind round spectacles. But the moment they stepped inside, the evidence was overwhelming. Bloodstains soaked into the floorboards. Kitchen tools smeared with human tissue. A camera containing rolls of film, photographs of Renée's body in grotesque poses. And in the refrigerator, cuts of human flesh, carefully wrapped, stored as though waiting to be cooked. The smell was unbearable. One officer reportedly staggered back, clutching his nose. Another muttered under his breath, "Mon Dieu." When confronted, Issei didn't resist. He didn't even attempt to lie. "Yes," he said softly. "I killed her." But his confession didn't stop there. At the station, Sagawa confessed in meticulous detail. He told police about his lifelong fantasies of eating human flesh, about how Renée had become the focus of those desires, and about how carefully he had planned her murder. "I never thought of women as people," he admitted. "Only as objects for consumption." He described the killing, how he invited her over, how she sat down to read poetry, how he pulled the trigger. Then, with disturbing calm, he explained the aftermath. How he undressed her. Touched her. Cut into her with a knife. Cooked her flesh. Ate it. Photographed everything. To him, this wasn't horror. It was fulfillment. It was tender, he told them. Like raw tuna. The detectives listening were shaken. They had heard confessions before, but never one so matter-of-fact, so chillingly detached from humanity. News spread quickly. Within days, French newspapers splashed the story across their front pages. Japanese student arrested for cannibal murder in Paris. The cannibal of the Bois de Boulogne. The public was horrified yet fascinated. Reporters described Sagawa as a frail, quiet man, tiny, almost childlike, who looked nothing like a monster. How could someone so small commit such an unthinkable crime? In Japan, the story exploded. Newspapers carried the details daily, and families across the country whispered about the shame he had brought on their nation. In the Netherlands, Renée's family was devastated, their grief compounded by the grotesque details printed in every article. Everyone assumed this was the end of the story. The evidence was overwhelming. The confession undeniable. Surely, Sagawa would face justice. Surely, he would spend the rest of his life in prison. But the case was about to take a shocking turn. The French court prepared to prosecute. The charges were clear. Murder, desecration of a corpse, cannibalism. The evidence, ironclad. But then came the psychiatric evaluations. French doctors examined Sagawa extensively, and their conclusion shocked everyone: he was legally insane. According to their reports, Sagawa was incapable of fully understanding the nature of his crime. He was declared unfit to stand trial. Instead of facing justice, he was committed indefinitely to a secure psychiatric hospital in Paris. For Renée's family, it was devastating. They wanted justice. They wanted the man who had destroyed their daughter's life to face the weight of the law. Instead, he was tucked away, hidden, perhaps, but not punished. For 2 years, Sagawa remained in the hospital. He was studied, observed, and interviewed. Doctors described him as calm, compliant, and articulate about his fantasies. He admitted openly that he still longed to eat human flesh. And yet, he was treated as a patient, not a prisoner. Behind the scenes, his wealthy father was working tirelessly to bring him home to Japan. The French system, eager to rid itself of the burden, eventually agreed. In 1983, the decision was made: Issei Sagawa would be deported. The condition was simple: he must be transferred directly into psychiatric care in Japan, where he would remain under supervision. But what happened next would stun the world. In the year 1983, French authorities placed Issei Sagawa on a plane bound for Tokyo. The world assumed he would be locked away for life. After all, the condition of his deportation was clear: once in Japan, he would remain confined in a psychiatric institution. France washed its hands of the case, relieved to see the "Cannibal of Paris" gone. But as the plane cut through the clouds, Sagawa wasn't thinking of hospitals or punishment. He was already imagining something else. His wealthy father had influence. His homeland was different from France. Perhaps things would not play out as the world expected. And he was right. Upon arrival in Tokyo, Japanese authorities ordered psychiatric evaluations. Doctors studied Sagawa carefully, reviewing his history, his actions, his confessions. They compared their findings to the French reports. The results shocked everyone. Japanese psychiatrists declared him sane. Yes, he was disturbed. Yes, his crime was horrific. But legally, he was not insane. He understood his actions. He had chosen them deliberately. Which meant the foundation of his detention in France, the claim of insanity, didn't hold up under Japanese law. Here was the legal trap. In France, Sagawa had never faced trial because he was declared unfit. In Japan, double jeopardy rules and extradition complications meant he could not be retried for the same crime. And now, with psychiatrists ruling him sane, there was no justification to keep him confined. Just 15 months after arriving in Japan, Issei Sagawa walked free. No prison. No hospital. No trial. Nothing. A confessed murderer and cannibal was now free to live among the public. The family of Renée Hartevelt was devastated. They had lost their daughter in the most gruesome way imaginable, and now the man responsible was not only alive, but free. The outrage was immediate. Newspapers in Europe and America carried headlines like, "The Cannibal Who Walked Free." But Sagawa didn't hide. In fact, he embraced the spotlight. Japanese media swarmed him. He gave interviews, describing in detail what Renée's flesh had tasted like, how he had cooked her, how he had photographed the entire process. He wrote books, some autobiographical, others filled with illustrations of his fantasies. Shockingly, publishers ate it up. His first memoir, In the Fog, sold thousands of copies. Other works followed. Sagawa became a twisted kind of celebrity. He was invited onto talk shows. He reviewed restaurants. He wrote articles about food, using his crime as a grotesque reference point. He even posed for magazine photo shoots, leaning into his reputation as the cannibal. For years, he lived off the notoriety of his crime. The public was divided. Some were fascinated, treating him like a dark curiosity. Others were outraged that a confessed killer could profit from his crime. In Europe, Renée's family begged the world not to give him attention, not to let her death be turned into spectacle. But in Japan, the media couldn't resist. Every time Sagawa appeared on TV or released a new book, audiences tuned in. One of the most disturbing aspects was how casual he was. He smiled, laughed, described his urges openly. He admitted he still fantasized about eating women. And yet, no one stopped him. Over time, Sagawa's infamy became his only identity. He was no longer just Issei Sagawa, the failed academic. He was the cannibal. But fame has its limits. Publishers eventually grew wary of his notoriety. Public disgust outweighed curiosity. Opportunities dried up. By the 1990s, Sagawa was no longer a media darling. He was an aging man, alone, living on the fringes of society. Still, he remained free. He painted. He wrote. He continued to speak openly about his fantasies, never once showing remorse for what he had done. As he aged, his health declined. He suffered from diabetes and strokes, eventually becoming frail and wheelchair-bound. The same frailty that once made him seem harmless had returned, but this time it was real. In interviews, he admitted that he was pitiful, that he had no prospects left. He lived on a small government stipend, his fame reduced to whispers of a horrific past. Yet, for the family of Renée, there was no justice in his suffering. The man who had killed and eaten their daughter had lived free for decades, profiting from her death, turning tragedy into his personal brand. In November 2022, Issei Sagawa died of pneumonia at the age of 73. No prison cell. No punishment. Just death by natural causes. The monster was gone, but the question remained, how could this have happened? How could a man confess to such a crime, brag about it for decades, and never face justice? The answer lies not only in Sagawa's actions, but in the failures of the systems meant to stop him. In the year 1981, a young Dutch woman was murdered, mutilated, and eaten in Paris. More than 4 decades later, the world still asks how her killer, Issei Sagawa, walked free. Renée Hartevelt's name often fades into the background when people recall the story. That, perhaps, is the greatest tragedy. She was not merely a victim, not simply the woman Sagawa ate. She was a daughter, a friend, a brilliant student of literature whose life was cut short in the most brutal way imaginable. But history has a cruel way of amplifying monsters while silencing victims. And in this case, the monster used the microphone willingly. The central question that haunts this case is simple: how could it happen? The answer lies in a tragic mix of law, psychiatry, and politics. France declared him insane. By removing the trial, they erased the chance for a conviction. Instead, he was confined as a patient, not punished as a criminal. Japan declared him sane. By overturning the insanity claim, they destroyed the reason for his detention. But since France had never convicted him, Japan had no legal basis to retry him. His father's influence, wealth and status greased the wheels, ensuring his return home and eventual freedom. The result, a confessed murderer and cannibal slipped through the cracks of 2 justice systems. For Renée's family, the pain never ended. They fought for years to keep her memory alive, to remind the world that she was more than a headline. But every new book Sagawa published, every television interview he gave, every grotesque restaurant review he wrote reopened their wounds. Imagine turning on the TV and seeing the man who killed and ate your daughter being treated like a guest on a talk-ass. Imagine hearing him describe her flesh as tender, like tuna, while the audience gasps or laughs. Their grief was not private. It was public, international, and endless. Sagawa leaned into his role as the celebrity cannibal. He appeared in documentaries. He collaborated with artists. He even acted in low-budget films, playing fictionalized versions of himself. To some, he became a symbol of morbid fascination. To others, a reminder of the grotesque failures of justice. But what disturbed many most was his lack of remorse. He admitted freely that if given the chance, he would do it again. His fantasies never ended. They defined him until the very last. By the 2000s, however, Sagawa's health declined rapidly. A series of strokes left him frail, wheelchair-bound, dependent on his brother for care. His notoriety no longer earned him money. His books went out of print. TV producers stopped calling. He lived out his final years in poverty and obscurity, a shadow of the man who once courted headlines. And then, in November 2022, the news broke: Issei Sagawa was dead. No prison bars. No execution. No justice served. Just a natural death at 73. The legacy of the case is complicated, disturbing, and unresolved. For criminologists, it is a chilling example of how mental health law and international jurisdiction can collide, leaving loopholes that monsters can slip through. For the public, it is a cautionary tale about fascination with evil. Sagawa thrived because people gave him attention. He became a celebrity because people watched, read, and bought his stories. For Renée's family, it is a lifelong wound that can never heal. More than 40 years later, one question lingers. How could a man who admitted to murder, mutilation, and cannibalism, walk free, live openly, and even profit from his crime? There is no satisfying answer. Only the bitter truth: sometimes, justice fails. And when it does, monsters walk among us. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like, share and subscribe for more true crime stories told like never before.